I'm by far the oldest that I happen to know. I mean, I'll be 81 in a month. So I'm not doing that well, but I'm just hanging on because I don't know how to play bridge and my back's too shitty for golf.
Hey, what's up, everyone? John here from the Cast and Spear podcast, and we have a phenomenal guest today. His name is Bill McIntyre. He is a war veteran, somebody who got started spearfishing in his 50s and is still doing it in his 80s. I think that's somebody that we all need to respect and learn from. In this podcast, we cover safety, we cover boating etiquette, and so much more. I hope you're as excited as I am. Let's jump into the conversation with Bill and how he found his love for the ocean.
Well, I was born and raised in St. Petersburg, Florida on the West Coast. My dad was a fishing guide and commercial fisherman, so I was always in a boat and on the water from, earliest I can remember. Something got me interested in spearfishing when I was maybe 12 or something. I'm not really certain, but I used to putter around under the docks in the boat basin with a little Hawaiian sling that my uncle made me. Then from about age 13 to 15, I guess you'd say I was doing some decent spearfishing. I got a champion arbalete, a French gun, and was shooting Goliath grouper and cobia and snook, stuff like that. And then when I was 15 in 1954, I won a big tarpon fishing contest where the first prize was a new Chevy, but I wasn't old enough to drive, so they gave me the cash. And my dad took all that to save for college, except enough to buy my first tank and regulator. So in 1954, I bought my first scuba gear, and I was mostly a scuba diver until I was 57. Really, I graduated from college in '60, and then went in the Marine Corps for 20 years, and Marine Corps stationed me a lot of places where it was good to dive. Luckily, it's close to the coast type service. My first duty station after observation school was Hawaii for a couple of years, and of course that was just wonderful. Met my wife on the beach at Waikiki, and went off to flight school in Pensacola, Florida, and had some great spearfishing there. And then I was stationed in North Carolina and California and Okinawa. My last unaccompanied overseas tour was a year on Okinawa before I retired, and that was, of course, great diving. Texas. Yeah, I was a flight instructor in Texas, and mostly rod and reel there, but some good diving. I had a unique opportunity to fly a F4 Phantom from Southern California to Vietnam, and we had to land and refuel in Hawaii, Wake, Guam, and the Philippines before arriving to Vietnam, and I dove all those spots on the way over.
I have so many questions about that F4. I'm a airplane buff. I used to have every single model airplane when I was a kid, and then I used to have a little F4. Actually, it was a pretty big model, and used to pretend that I was flying that around the house. To be honest, I heard that was a very slow plane. Not to get too far off topic, I heard it was pretty hard to maneuver. Is that true, or was that just hearsay?
I mean, no, not really. There's so many different things about airplane performance. It would go Mach 0.2.1, Mach 2.1, and that's pretty fast. My son was a Marine F-18 pilot for 10 years, and I kid him that they could only go 1.6. Of course, the F-18 could kill an F-4 just because of the superior, weapons capability and turn radius and all, but
I think that's what I was. It was more the not just overall speed. I was thinking about the turn, the ability to maneuver tight turns and stuff like that. So you weren't going to be dogfighting an F4, right? You're mainly just going to have a big payload and come in and handle business.
And I flew the fighter egg version back in the States, but in Vietnam I flew a photo reconnaissance version unarmed. It just had the 3 optical camera stations, infrared and side-looking radar, and it just took pictures of bad people. so you weren't really involved in dogfights if you're lucky.
Right. Hope not.
Couldn't shoot. So it's a different thing. And I've also over there flew the EF-10B, which was an electronic countermeasures aircraft that all of those missions were up north supporting the Army and Air Force strikes. We'd jam the gun control radars so that we couldn't keep them from shooting, but we could keep them from aiming.
Right.
Using the radar to aim.
Do you miss flying at all?
It's funny. Now, it's almost like it was somebody else that did that. I mean, it's been so long. It's tough for me to really relate to. So I can't say I actively miss it. I mean, I retired from the Marine Corps in 1980. Mm-hmm. That's the time I flew a jet. So not exactly something I'm current doing.
Did you see a change over that time from when you first got your regulator to, before you switched over to kind of like freediving? Was there a pretty big change in the ocean landscape?
Before I address that, I guess I should complete my timeline thing. I was a scuba diver until age 57, and then I got back into freediving. Mm-hmm. Since then, the only time I've ever used scuba gear is to retrieve a stuck anchor or a fish tied up deep in the kelp or something like that. But I've been, just freediving since then. Okay, so back to your story. Immediate question. I've been diving in so many different places, and none of them for very long, where it's hard to say I don't know how it's changed in Florida since I was a kid, because I'm not in Florida. I don't know how it's changed in Hawaii because I was just there 2.5 years. Although I have some inkling, I remember any fool could load a stringer with parrotfish back when I was there, and now I understand they're considered very spooky and hard to shoot. And it's hard for me to realize that. I guess it's selective breeding. Only the smart ones survived. I don't know, but the place I've been the longest is here in Southern California. The Marine Corps stationed me. I was stationed here in 65, 66 before I went to Vietnam, and I came back in 75 and overseas in Okinawa for 1 year then, but otherwise been here since then. And so I have seen pretty big changes in California, and contrary to what you might expect, they're mostly for the better. When I first started spearfishing, a 50-pound white sea bass was notable. I mean, the world record was over 80, so it wasn't, but still, it was, hey man, a guy got one over 50. Whereas now, a lot of people, their first fish is over 50. It's still nice, but it's nothing to write home about. And I think that's attributable to the fact that, I don't know what year it was, they outlawed the inshore gill netting. And now the fish get to grow up, and get big. So that's, white sea bass has really gotten better since I've been diving here.
I think we should switch over a little bit to safety, because thank you again for sending over that post that you published on Deeper Blue. But just like a little backstory, I think it was this year, a couple buddies, and I went out to the oil rigs, and I got to witness my first shallow water blackout, which was very terrifying. And then there's also been a couple guys who haven't really made it back. And I think you have some things to say on what the best practices is. I'd like to kind of just make sure that there's more people talking about it, because safety is super important, but nobody likes to really talk about it seems like. So if you can kind of go into a little bit about your history of the people that you've known who haven't made it, and what happened, so we can kind of put some context to it, so people can kind of not make the same mistakes.
It's hard to tell if there's a particular pattern, but I guess there's at least some. The backstory, I guess that conversation started as for the last 20 years or so, I've kept a emergency contact log on my boat, and I don't always remember, but I try to remember when a guy comes aboard the boat for the first time to have him fill out his the name of his emergency contact, phone number, and relationship, like it's your mother or your wife. Or because you stop and think about it, a lot of people I dive with, the only way I know them is from the internet. all I have is their cell phone number, and if they don't come up, calling their cell probably won't help. So I want to have somebody else to call. And just recently, I just looked through that log while I was bringing it up to date and saw that there were 5 people who had been diving on my boat that were now dead. And I forget the total of the people who have been on my boat, but still it kind of brings it home. Luckily, none of them died while diving from my boat, although one died while I was diving with him in Mexico. So yeah, out of 5 people, one of them was a totally unrelated to diving death, but the other's a guy that I dove with just a little bit, died lobster diving, which I think most of us don't think is the most dangerous thing in the world, and this is all secondhand, but he was out at Santa Barbara Island night diving for lobster, and they say there was a huge swell running, and his buddies are pretty sure he just got driven up into a cave next to the island, by a swell, and held there, and until he drowned. They found him laying on the bottom in the mouth of the cave. So is that a lack of a buddy system? I don't know. If his buddy had been right with him, maybe his buddy would have been swept into the cave too. It's what's the lesson to be learned? Wow, watch out if there's a big swell running. I mean, it's all kind of amorphous. Another guy the one that had been, he dove with me quite a bit. He's kind of a no-nonsense, never smile, hardcore macho guy. He'd been a UDT diver in Vietnam, drifting down rivers, blowing up Viet Cong bamboo bridges and stuff. But gosh, I mean, he came down from Santa Barbara, spent the night at the house, before we went diving. So fairly close. And I was amazed one time that when I got my first sea bass over 50 pounds. Like I say, it used to be something to mention. And so I posted on the old freedive list. It was before we had these web-based things. And I told the story about how I shot this fish and it wrapped up on the bottom at 55 feet. And in those days, I was within my capability. I had to be careful. But the visibility was probably 2 or 3 feet at most on the bottom. He's wrapped up in thick kelp. And okay, then the current came up, and usually you can hang on to some kelp to rest while you breathe up, but then the whole kelp bed went underwater, so I had to be kicking hard while I was breathing up, which reduced my bottom time. And I got my hand on the shaft once, and I said, "Oh, hell with this! I'm not dying for this fish, and I'm not going to cut everything off." So I went back to the boat and got a pony bottle, a small scuba bottle, and I cut the fish out. So I posted this on this freedive list, and he sent me a private reply saying that I was no freediver, that he would never do a thing like that, and if he did, he sure as hell wouldn't broadcast it on the internet. And I replied that, well, frankly, I thought it might give young studs permission to know it's okay to try and be safe. But anyway, we never dove again together. And then, I mean, it's awkward to say this, but he moved down to Mexico, built a house on the Pacific coast, and I heard that he died down there. They found his body laying on the bottom near a yellowtail that was tied up in some kelp. So I guess he was a pure freediver right to the end. And he had a buddy, but the buddy was, not close enough to help. And then one other guy, I guess you could say this is kind of related to pride. There were 3 of us down in Mexico, La Paz, for a 3-day trip. And after the 3rd day, well, backing off, I didn't even want to go because I didn't think I had a gun big enough, but one of them talked me into it. And I had shot one wahoo, and this other guy, whose name I won't mention, he'd shot, I don't know, a few wahoo and a couple of yellowfin tuna. And then the 3rd guy, the one who ended up dead, was probably a better diver than either one of us, but he just didn't happen to have gotten any, it ain't all skill. So the afternoon of the third. Oh, but he could do something that neither the other guy nor I could do, which was dive deep and shoot pargo down the reef. And pargo are notorious for dragging people into holes and being hard to cut out. They're strong. So he had shot a couple of those, and after the third day, my ears clogged up, so I couldn't get past 10 feet. And I said, okay. So I waved to the pongo to come pick me up. And the pongo was right next to this guy who died. He came over to pick me up, and by the time we pulled in my float and stuff, got it in the boat, the other guy called. He wanted to be picked up too, so we went over to pick him up. And then we came back to where we saw the guy's float. And by the time we got there, it was obvious he couldn't be holding his breath that long. He was nowhere near that float on the surface. So we jumped in, and luckily it was very clear, and I could spot just a black spot on the bottom. I got down to 10 feet, and I could barely see him kneeling on the bottom with his head and shoulders under a ledge. There's no way I can dive to 90 feet and bring somebody up, or no way I can dive to 90 feet, period, much less bring up a body. But luckily the Pangero was a top diver. He went down and pulled him out. He said his hand was wrapped around the cable a couple times as if, to help pull the shaft out. But there's nothing on the end of the shaft. We figure the fish must have got off, and he just blacked out there in place. All 90% of blackouts are supposed to be within 10 feet of the surface and so on. I doubt a fish pulled him back down there and arranged him on his knees perfectly with his head and shoulders on the ledge. He must have just stayed down there too long. So what's to do with that? We didn't use a real tight buddy system, I guess, because nobody was right next to him. The pongo came over to get me and the other guy. But on the other hand, if I'd have been straight over him, I still couldn't have helped him, which brings up another thing that Terry Moss has mentioned to me several times, that for the buddy system work, your buddy needs to be better than you, because, you're not, if you see your buddy trying to die, you're probably not going to breathe up carefully and be at your best. Now that won't apply if you they say most blackouts happen right on the surface. So if your buddy's right there, he doesn't have to be a great diver. He can help you. But so what caused his death? I guess this guy didn't like the fact that he was not getting as many fish as the other guy. He was kind of a proud, competitive sort.
What did they say? Ego is the enemy?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess it is. I don't know. I'm wondering all over. What's the lesson there? I guess the lesson is use a tight buddy system, and the other lesson is don't push your limits. I'm very conservative, and so I don't have good bottom time, and I get less fish by now when I'm about to turn 81. But it's just not worth it. And to put it perfectly selfishly, the hardest thing I ever had to do was call his wife from La Paz and tell her she was the single mother of 5 children. And then
5 kids.
Get him cremated. Oh, then I found that you can't bring a coffin into LAX because you might have drugs in it. So you have to pass the body across at the surface at Tijuana in this case. That would have cost a lot more money and trouble. And she agreed to let me get him cremated in La Paz and then bring him home with carry-on luggage. And so, where I'm going with that is I felt sorry for him at first. Before the whole thing was over, I was pissed at him for the trouble he was causing me and my wife. My wife, his wife.
Right.
Don't put your loved one through that. If you're reckless for yourself, okay, but you probably have somebody that loves you. Is going to miss you.
Especially if you have that many kids as well. It's kind of like no fish is ever worth, no picture is ever worth any of that, to be honest. That's intense.
Yeah, well, that's just, I mean, everybody, I mean, we've heard of tons of people dying diving, and my purpose in going through those is just to bring it home. It's, when I looked at that list and said, God, 5 people that have been on my boat are dead now. That's, whoa, it can really happen, and so be careful.
Yeah, I think it's super important. Thank you for sharing that, because, I mean, you gotta kind of be shown this often. Otherwise, it gets very easy to forget that this is inherently just a very dangerous way to gather protein, right? It's like it's adventurous, it's fun, it makes you feel like you're a hunter, but at the end of the day too, it's like you're not in your natural, you're not hunting like you're hunting for elk or something where, you're not going to black out and then just can't breathe. So you have to up your level of caution.
A fair question for somebody listening to this would be, well, if you're so concerned with safety, now what do you do? Do you, Bill, follow the rules? And I'll have to admit, no. In Southern California, kelp beds, the one up, one down just doesn't work like it does in crystal clear water in Florida, where you're diving straight up and down. And I've tried it. I've watched my buddy disappear into the kelp and with poor viz. And after a while, I say, gee, he ought to be up by now. And I look around and, yeah, there, 10 yards across the kelp bed in any old direction, there he is up. Well, what if he hadn't come up? I come up and immediately sunk. And I didn't happen to be looking that way. It's really doesn't work very well, to follow those rules in Southern California. So what do? I urge people, I think the most dangerous thing we do is trying to cut a fish out of the kelp on the bottom. So I say, okay, guys, if you have a fish wrapped up, you call me, or better yet, call one of the other young guys to come over and watch you, because that's when our exposure is greatest, and that's when somebody can at least see straight over you, even if he can't see you. And the other thing I guess I should mention in connection with that is it's probably safer to use a float line than it is a reel. I know an awful lot of people prefer reels, and I did for many, many years. But if your buddy doesn't come up and he's using a float line, he's probably at the end of the float line. So at least you follow that float line down to find him. You may or may not be in time to save him, but on the other hand, bringing a body home is a lot better than saying we don't know what happened to him.
Absolutely. Do you use the kelp carrot at the end of your float line when you're in the kelp?
Yeah, just a little kelp carrot, or the what do you call it? Snake float that Gannett sells. It's for the same purpose, but it doesn't provide any flotation to fight a fish. It just provides, well, it helps find the end of your float line, because it's floating if you lost contact with it. But on 2 different occasions, I've had a fish take all of my 125-foot float line, and the only reason it didn't go right out through my hand was because that little float, stuck in my hand at the end. That's pretty rare to not be able to slow the fish down and make it turn before 125 feet of line. But in both those cases, I'd have lost the whole damn thing. I know a lot of guys just use the naked float line. They say, nah, I feel a little drag from that, little float back there. I don't think it's a big deal. Or they say they tie knots in their float line so they can feel, like 5 feet from the end when the knot goes through their hand. That might work. I just prefer to have something that's more positive to stick in my hand, when the line's going through it.
Absolutely. Was that a white sea bass that took your whole float line?
Both of those were white sea bass. When I'm out in open water for yellowtail, I use just a 50-foot float line, deepest I'm ever going to dive, and a big float that can fight the fish, breakaway float line. So that's altogether different. If it comes to that and pull all the line through my hand, then okay, fight the big float. But you can't do that in the kelp. because you just can't tow a big float down under the kelp and up the other side and all, and hangs out or hangs up.
Yeah, I had a chance to shoot it's small compared to most people, but it was a 35-pound yellowtail. This one of my last trips to Baja this year, and it's crazy how if you're not super careful, how the fish can wrap around you with that reel line. Whereas I'd much rather have had like a float line where you can just kind of just let everything go and just kind of hold on to something versus manage this crazy line that you're trying to pull in. It wraps around you and all this other stuff. So I'm kind of switching it over to the float line.
For a float line, when you get down to the shooting line, then the shooting line's the same. Cable on or whatever, and so you're still the final portion. You've got that to deal with wrapping you up. But yeah, I that's the other reason I like that. Why I've gone to float lines in the kelp is because they're easier to see, easier to grab, easier to find your way, down through the murk and the kelp, and not get tangled in them like a real line.
Let's switch off a little bit. I know you've mentioned that you had a lot of people on your boat, and there's a lot of newer kind of spear fishermen that listen to my podcast. Do you have any, good boat etiquette rules that people should think about, like when they go on a new person's boat?
How many hours do you have? It's funny.
That's what not most people don't talk about it. So it's like I would love to have a seasoned person kind of be like.
I went back to an old thread on Spearboard there, remembered where we, exchanged, ideas, and I printed out some of them to remind me. But okay, let's start with the easy stuff. Communicate. Talk to the skipper and see what his expectations are, because what I need expect from you on my boat, in some cases, will differ from somebody else's boat. His boat's bigger, smaller, open, closed, whatever. But first of all, backing off, I just hope that people will split up the gas equally, and I pay a share. I know a lot of skippers say, "Well, hell, I've got all the huge expenses of purchase and maintenance and all. I shouldn't have to pay," and I can't quarrel with that. I choose to pay a share of the gas. But anyway, find out what it's going to cost. And I like to give a guy an estimate. I like the last couple trips I've gone to San Clemente Island with 3 of us, and it was about $90 each. And if a guy's just used to beach diving at Crystal Cove, that might be sticker shock to him. I want him to know what he's going to get into. And so that's a rough estimate. When we come back, I have a flow scan totalizer that shows how much gas we burned within a gallon or so. And so I'm able to tell right there at the camp after we get the boat out exactly how much we burned. And I looked at the price of gas at the ARCO station when I was on the way down in the morning, and I say, and so it's this much. A lot of people don't have a flow scan. They're going to have to use an estimate, or they're going to have to wait till they fill it. That's what I used to do years ago. Is I'll get back to you after I fill the boat and tell you exactly. But it's nicer to be able to tell them right there. Anyway, and then expect to pay that much. I don't have a license. It's not a boat for hire, so it's strictly voluntary. But if you want to get invited back, it's probably best to be willing to pay for your share of the gas. So how many guns are you going to bring? Don't show up with 5 guns for a 16-foot center console boat, or even for my 22-foot boat. Get that out of the way. I've got room for 8 guns in my gun holders. But so with 3 guys, that's usually not a problem. But anyway, ask how many guns you can bring. And then another thing is, put your gears in. I know people that go out on the Peace or big head boats, party boats, oftentimes bring a big trash barrel, with all their stuff in it. And I guess that's fine when there's a lot of deck space. But in a smaller boat, you take your guns and fins and all out of the trash barrel, and the trash barrel is still taking just as much room as it did before. It doesn't disappear. So I would prefer you bring a soft bag that once we get all of your gear out of it, it scrunches up real small, and we'll probably put it up in the cabin so that it's not taking up deck space. But again, they just ask the skipper. I had one very famous diver who was really impressed with himself insist on bringing a trash barrel aboard. I said, okay, but he never came back. Coolers. A lot of guys will want to bring a big cooler aboard. In my case, don't. I have a big, reliable kill bag, for the fish, and I have that's folded up below decks until we need it, and then I have a couple of 20-pound bags of ice in a igloo that keeps them nice and cold until we need them. And I have another cooler that's big enough for all the lunches and stuff like calicos and all of, so we won't have to get out the big bag. Anyway, saying is, don't expect to bring your coolers aboard my boat. Leave them in your truck and use them to carry your fish home after we get in from a great trip. Food and drink. Bring what you need to eat and drink. People will ask if I want them to bring something for me, and I say, no, I don't eat real food. I eat stuff like trail mix and Cliff bars and all. I find that easier to digest. But anyway, don't expect somebody else to provide your food and drink for you. Ice. Offer to bring some ice. Again, in my case, I've probably already got the ice, and it's a big cooler, and I'll be loading it in the boat at home first thing in the morning. And so we don't need your ice. In fact, there's no place to put it, but keep it in your cooler to take your fish home. Be there on time. It's kind of a bummer to be sitting in the dark at 5:30 in the morning, wondering when the guy's going to get there. When we leave the dock, look around, help pull in the fenders if there are any in the dock lines. I have an old crusty dive buddy who's kind of famous, but he and I exchanged stories, and he said there's another guy, super diver, super nice guy. He's a member of the Neptunes, and this friend of mine is a member of the Neptunes. And every time they leave the dock, he'd say, Joe, why don't you bring in the dock lines and fenders? Okay. And then he said, where do you want me to put them? He said, same place you put them last time, Joe. The guy just didn't connect that way, I've got a couple of guys that, go on my boat that know what to do better than I do, I mean, you show them something once and they're there, like a Volvo outdrive, you shouldn't start the engine with the outdrive tilted because the linkage can tear up the rubber bellows, that connects it. And so he'll say, is your outdrive down? Before he sees me reaching for the key, stuff like that. And I love that. And, somebody else might be offended, but you want to keep me from screwing something up, have at it. And I'll thank you for the help. But anyway, there's guys like that, that just know everything. Same thing when we come back to the dock. I've seen some great divers still sitting there on their cell phone, sending fish pictures to their buddies as I come up to the dock. When we get near a dock, start thinking about, grabbing a line or whatever we need to do and help get tied up, help get the trailer and truck. That's another thing. I can't expect everybody to back a trailer down. If you know how, I'll trust you to do it. But if you don't, I'll leave you holding the boat and I'll go back it down, and then we'll switch. But it's a plus if you do know that sort of thing. If you cancel at the last minute, stuff happens. I realize that life is complicated, but maybe the skipper didn't invite somebody else because he invited you, and now you're leaving, the other guys to cover your share of the gas. So it's probably, if you have to cancel, it's probably good to offer to pay your share. Maybe I'll turn you down and maybe I won't, but it's a nice gesture. And then stay around and clean up. The last couple times we got in back to the dock in the dark and from San Clemente Island, and I'm dead tired because I'm ancient and it's, cold, and stay and clean the boat up until it's clean and put away. And then a real favorite of mine is you get out to a dive spot and a guy tells you, I really need to be in at 4. Well, yeah. Well, no kidding. You should have told me that up front.
That's the worst.
Yeah, because I'd invited somebody else. I don't, unless you tell me ahead of time. I say that's good. I'm okay with that.
I think it's also important to kind of say how long it takes to clean a boat, because this is something that it was kind of shocking to somebody who doesn't own one. The first couple times you do it, you're like, oh, I'm gonna get back at the dock at 7, but it's like you're gonna be cleaning that boat for like an hour or 2. If you're doing a thorough job, not just a rinse job, it's like you have to get the scrub brushes, you have to get the soap, you need to do a bunch of things.
Maybe put a canvas cover on. I'd say for mine, I'd allow about an hour from the time we hit the dock until we're driving away. In general. Oh, another pet peeve of mine is anchoring. If I tell you to go up on the bow and get ready to anchor, that means just get ready to anchor. Don't drop it until I say drop it. I'm idling around, maybe in different directions, reversing, looking at the depth sounder, trying to get us right over the high spot, or trying to get us off the submerged kelp, so into the sand, so we won't have trouble getting the anchor out. And then I'll hear the thing's going down. I said, no, wait until I say drop it. I'm not ready yet. Okay, and then pulling it. If you're lucky, you go on a boat with a windlass. Mine doesn't have one. I've got an anchor retrieval ball that is too complicated to go into, but it never fails, requires no electricity in it. Makes it a lot easier if you got a lot of line out with a heavy anchor. But anyway, I'm not gonna pull the anchor. I used to years ago, but now I'm gonna play age and let you guys pull the anchor. But don't let the other guy, say if there's 3 of us, don't have one of the other 2 pulling the anchor all the time. I've had guys come back and say, well, I guess that guy was too good to do it, huh? And that leaves me awkward, to have to say, John, it's your turn, to go up and pull the anchor. But instead of letting Jack do it all the time, that's
right.
just to think about. Oh man, I guess
going back to food and drink, do you let guys bring beers on the boat, or do you tell them no, like save it for after you shoot all the fish?
I do let them. It's funny, I drink way too much, but I never do it on the boat. I mean, even after we, through diving, it's too hard for me to stay awake in my old age. So I don't drink a beer even on the way in, but if other guys want to, that's okay with me. But that's another thing. Ask the skipper, what he thinks about bringing a beer. Nothing wrong with having a beer. For the long ride in from the island, I'm having cans of espresso. Keep me awake and alert. But young guys can probably handle having a beer just fine.
Yeah, and for the young guys, I wouldn't recommend having a beer during a dive or before you start diving. It messes up your sinuses, or at least for mine. I've tried it once, and it's and plus you want to be fully cognizant down there. Like, it's already too difficult. So it's like save the boat after you shoot the fish.
Yeah, I would just never even consider having a beer before I dive. And like I say, I drink, like Brett Kavanaugh, I drank a lot of beer. But, not before I dived.
Right.
I just I need all my faculties facilities, especially at my age. Like I'm working my ass off with weights and riding a bike and rowing machine just to barely try and stay in this game at my age. But definitely, I don't need the alcohol before I die.
Any other pet peeves of yours that you'd like to share?
Nah. Be a nice guy, and I'll have to admit, just ask people to pay for a share of the gas. I seldom complain if they want to pay a little more than that.
A little tip to the skipper?
Pardon?
A little tip to the skipper?
Yeah. And now this is really specific to me, but I'd prefer you not hand me cash. I'll just stuff it in my pocket and then it'll go through the washer or something. I'd prefer you PayPal me. That way I don't have to deal with cash. But that's a specific thing to me. But if your share was $70 and you PayPal me $75, I won't turn around and PayPal you back $5.
Hint. I gotcha. Well, thank you. I mean, that was very helpful. I think that was a perfect rundown. And a lot of that stuff I wish I heard before my first couple times on the boat. And I mean, for the new guys, you're going to make mistakes, but, as long as you're not totally oblivious and you learn from them, you'll be invited back, hopefully.
Oh, I guess one other thing about that is, we're not a tournament on my boat. It isn't competition. And it's fine if you're a lot better than me and the other guy and shoot a lot more fish, but what should I say? Don't go out of your way to try and make sure you get, or that another guy doesn't get one or stuff like that. I kind of feel like, well, at my age, I have to, I'm certainly not competitive, but I think it's because my dad was a fishing guide. And when he came in, he'd say how many fish he caught. Well, he didn't mean personally, but it was his boat, his idea, his plan. His customers caught them, but yeah, his fish. In a way, I feel the same way. I just want guys on my boat to get fish. It makes me feel good. So I'm not in any competition with them, but I'd like, don't rush to be the first guy in the water before we get the anchor down and try and beat the other two guys, that sort of thing. Just, be reasonable.
How do you guys do it? Because when we go down to Baja or even just on the boat in general, we always usually split the total kill. Or if you have a fish that, you're very proud of, or maybe it's the big grouper or whatever, it's like, okay, that's yours. Cool. But we split the rest, so people have like a stake, a first like little, put your name on the fish that you want to keep. But the rest just gets like community pot. Is that kind of like what you guys do, or is there better ways to do it?
Oh, that's strictly personal preference. Like I don't really care for yellowtail. So people shoot yellowtail and offer me a share, and I say, no thanks. And if I shoot a yellowtail, I'll say, do you want it? I'd white sea bass, I prefer, but it's strictly nice. I think, well, put it this way, you certainly ought to offer. If you shoot a fish and the other guys don't, then, offer, to split it up. If they want it, fine. If they don't, good for you.
Yeah, exactly. So what is your rank in terms of like your favorite fish in the, it doesn't have to be local, but sounds like white sea bass is at the top of the list. I could be wrong. What is your kind of like hierarchy of fish that you go after?
Well, that's it. I'm almost apologetic about this, but I've been shooting fish since the early 1950s, and I don't know. I just don't want to bother to shoot a calico or a sheephead. But I don't like sheephead. I do like calicos, but I'd rather. I have this attitude that if I shoot a calico, as soon as the trigger's pulled, I'm going to be mobbed by a big school of giant white sea bass, and I'm not going to be able to shoot one. So I don't want to shoot at a calico. And in fact, I kind of prefer that my buddies hold off for a while when we get in the kelp bed on shooting calicos until we find out we didn't see any white sea bass for a while, because I think it does tend to run run them out of the kelp bed when they hear the noise. But it's pretty narrow for me. Oh, halibut. Oh, I love halibut, but you know, I don't know. I have attention deficit disorder. When I was a scuba diver, I used to shoot a lot more halibut because it's easy to cruise to the bottom and stare at it, you know, and it's not so easy when you're a free diver. And say if it's real clear water out at San Clemente Island and there's rocks and reef and night sand and this looks like a good place for halibut, I ought to stare at the bottom of the well, and I'll find myself saying, looking up and say, yeah, but is there a white sea that's swimming by right in front of me? While I'm staring at the bottom.
How long do you like to generally chill before you guys take your first shot then, if you're in the kelp? Just for my knowledge. Like, do you wait like 20 minutes? Is it an hour? 10 minutes?
You mean before we give up and go to another place?
Either go to another place or, you know, generally shoot off a calico or so.
Oh, I see. A calico. Oh, I don't have any firm rule on that. You know, it's not a real big deal. But if you try and pin me down, I'd kind of on the side of the kelp bed, maybe 20 minutes anyway before you.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Calico. Yeah.
I know you've dove in a bunch of other countries. Do you have any favorite stories from abroad, or you know, is it any different? You know, like localism or any of that kind of stuff that you have to worry about?
Misleading. I mean, in terms of other countries, Wake Island is just an atoll in the middle of the Pacific, and I just dove there one afternoon, and it's owned by it's an American outpost. Guam, same thing. Philippines. I got out of Vietnam. It was a real holiday to have an excuse to fly out to Subic Bay in the Philippines and use flush toilets and hot showers. But I went diving and all I had was a camera there. As far as I go, I had my Nikonos taking pictures. But you know, I don't have the only foreign country I've lived in for any amount of time and dove was Okinawa. That's Japanese. Can't say there was any particular difference there. I understand now it's illegal to have a spear gun. If it was when I was there, I didn't know it. But on the other hand, I didn't have one because I was there without my family. I lived in a bachelor officer's quarters room with no way to cook. And all I did for a year was take pictures with my Nikonos and collect shells. It's a shell collector's paradise. And I find out about dogtooth tuna and all that, and I say, what? You know, it's too bad I didn't know about it then, but I didn't. I think I'm a little different. I think a lot of people go through shooting stuff when they're young and then becoming, you know, photographers in their old age, and I'm kind of doing it backwards. I went for many years mainly trying to take pictures, and now here I am in my old age trying to kill things again. I don't even have a GoPro. So why do I do that? I not smart enough to play bridge. My back's too bad to play golf, and so it keeps me off the streets. But I've always been on the ocean and in the ocean. And by the way, until about 10 years ago, I did a lot of rod and reel fishing. All summer out here, I'd fish for marlin instead of being out spearfishing. And like I said, my dad was a fishing guide. In North Carolina, I marlin fished a lot. And I just, for some reason, just gave it up. I sold all my, I'm not interested in rod and reel fishing anymore. It's a lot more fun to get skunk spearfishing than it is trolling for marlin, because you're at least in the water and get to see things, you know. And it's athletic. You're getting some exercise instead of sitting drinking a beer.
Can you go in a little bit about that? Because I haven't gone after marlin per se, but it would be interesting to hear some of like your stories on what it's like trolling for those guys and what the fight is like. Or did you catch them and release, or did you keep them? I'm just very curious.
At the first, we kept them, but then we started catching and release. Unless I had a new guy on my boat, you know, that never caught one. Well, if he wanted to keep it, I think it's probably still true. It's you take it into Avalon with a Marlin flag flying. You fire a cannon off the pier, act like it's the first one they've ever seen. When you could be in line to do this on a good day. A guy jumps down in your boat and tapes the mouth closed so the tongue won't hang out, hooks up a loop to the tail, hoists it up, puts it on the scale. If you don't have a camera, they call a photographer to come down and take a picture, give you a bottle of champagne. That's kind of neat, for your Marlin.
Just over at Catalina? That's what they do?
Yeah.
Wow, I had no clue.
They have a rope, to hold back the spectators there on the dock, at Avalon. Now, this is dated, but they sure were doing it for years. I don't know. It's part of the tourist attraction thing is to, hang up a fish there for the spectators. But in terms of doing it, it can be boring as hell, just trolling all day, with 4 lures out, say. But if you're lucky and they're coming up feeding, you can see birds, school feeding along. Go over there and there's bills flashing, and you, in my case, and in many cases, you have a mackerel hooked up in a bait tank with circulating water, and you maybe run up on the bow and cast the mackerel to the Marlin, and then sit there with it in free spool. And the mackerel's taking the line. Yeah. Oh, but now it's running steady. So you put it in gear and strike. And it's not just on feeders too. A lot that these striped marlin on the West Coast will swim along with their tails sticking out of water. So it's as much hunting as it is fishing. You're constantly looking if you're any good. You assign sectors of the horizon to the people on the boat to stare at, and that you see a and you go over and try and get out ahead of him and throw a mackerel at him. But that's kind of fun. In fact, it's a lot of fun if it works. But I don't know. I only got over it.
What was the biggest marlin you ever caught?
Oh, just 168 or so, I think.
I mean, that's still big. It's still a big fish.
Before I came out here from North Carolina, I caught the first blue marlin taken in that section of the North Carolina coast in the spring. My picture in the paper and all. That was fun. And then we came out here and in the same summer fished for striped marlin. But the blue marlin fishing in North Carolina is entirely different out there in the Gulf Stream. If you don't hook one, you don't see them. They don't tail. They don't jump. I've never seen them, blasting bait on the surface. It's a altogether different sort of a thing.
Now, when you go spearfishing, do you ever take a rod and reel just to drop down for fun, or is it always pure on the boat? We're going spearfishing. That's it. That's it.
I had a guy last couple trips said, "Could I bring a rod and reel and throw a jig?" I said, "Well, sure," but then he wanted to jump in the water and spearfish too. I didn't see what the point of it was going to be, but yeah, bring it along. But we'll put it this way: I'm never changing the plan in order to fish with rod and reel. I know a lot of guys I see on OC Spearos, they seem to be rod and reel in it as much as spearfishing, and that's fine. But that's just different. I didn't want to do.
I think the last thing I want to chat a little bit about is some of the clubs, because you're in OC Spearos, right?
Yeah, I just joined it a couple months ago.
Oh, really? That recent? Were you in a different one, or just never bothered to be in a club?
Well, I was in another club, but well, might as well name names. The Fathomeers and the Neptunes are just too damn far away from St. Clemente.
Oh, for sure.
I just don't want to drive up there and have a couple beers and try and drive home at night. I joined another club, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. Me and another relatively old guy, over 50, that was a little closer. And, I thought, yeah, maybe I'll find some dive buddies. Nobody would talk to us. I think they just maybe they didn't like their grandfather or something. But and I look like their grandfather. I'm older than their grandfathers in some cases, so I don't blame them. I mean, they just don't know how to relate. And this was a real young club, so okay, that didn't work. I've never been to an OC Spearos meeting, and I probably won't. I just joined to support because as opposed to being exclusive like some clubs where you have to be a pledge for a year.
Back to the frat life.
Yeah, I was in a fraternity.
Same. I'm like, I don't know if I want to go back to that.
Yeah, I don't want to go back to that. I mean, they feel like they're special that way because they don't, they know all the club members are good divers supposedly or whatever. But I kind of like the OC Spearos. I mean, who's putting on the big tournaments? Making a lot of noise. They are, they're, some old farts say, well, they're, attracting too many people to the sport and that'll make the spots too crowded. I've been through that for a lot of years. That's true. But on the other hand, look at the gear we have. When I first got back into freedive spearfishing when I was 57, outside of some little Euro guns, you had Rice or Steve Alexander. If would do you a favor and make you a gun if he wasn't chasing butterflies in Baja or something. Now there's a lot of great guns. I'm sorry. And then Darrell Long. I used a Wright for a couple of years, and then I got the first gun ever shipped to California. I didn't even realize that until Darrell was on my boat a few years ago and mentioned that was the first one. I said, no kidding? I didn't know. I've had a lot of long guns since then. But that was kind of it. And now, man, there's Little Sub, that's an American gun that's made in Hawaii. That's good. You got Avions. I've got a couple of those. They're, made in Italy. Well, now they're being made in the U.S. But I could go on and on. There's Blue Tex, and there's a lot of neat stuff and a lot better fins and better wetsuits. So it's mixed blessing to have a lot of guys in the sport, but I think it's good.
Yeah, it is kind of, there's only so many spots, but at the same time too, it's like this was a bigger sport back in the day already, right? Like I looked at some of the history of it. It's like in the 40s and 50s or even 60s, like spearfishing was a thing. Like I feel like it's just now just having a resurgence. So it's like, why not have more people in this sport? I don't know, to be honest.
Well, it's certainly. I mean, I have being retired. I have the luxury of doing it on weekdays, so I don't have to fight the crowds at the dive spots or at the ramp, So there's good and bad about it. It's discouraging to run 50 miles out to San Clemente Island and find a boat anchored on the first spot you wanted to try. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, is there etiquette there? Like when it comes to, if you do see a boat that's already at a spot, give them as much time as they need until they leave before you come into it, or is there like a distance that you can stay away? Like, what's that etiquette?
Like I can think of a couple spots, say at San Clemente Island, that it's just a reef coming up to about 50 feet, with 110 feet all around it. And it's pretty small, so I would never come drop an anchor on it next to another boat already there. It's just not enough room. That would be a no-no. Now where it gets harder is if there's a huge kelp bed. How far away is okay, to anchor from them, and that's different people are going to have a different answer to that. What's crowding too much. And same with the first person there. Some of them are going to be offended if you anchor within a mile of them, and others are going to say, "Hey, yeah, no problem." That's all first choice, I guess. And I don't have the definitive answer.
Yeah, What other things do you want to let newbie divers know? Anything else?
Stay off my spots. That's the standard line.
How can people find you if they want to reach out? Just say hi. Is it just on Facebook? Is there any other ways to reach you?
I'm on that OC Spearos Facebook group. You can find me there, or yeah, I'm on Facebook in general. I guess I've got a throwaway email address that it's not the one I use for all the banks, and also I could change it if it gets too clogged. If you want to copy that, wsbhtr. That's like white sea bass hunter. Ho ho. At cox.net.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes so other people, if they do want to reach out. I know Brett Whitman. I don't know if you've talked to him. He really wants to have you on his podcast in the near future. You're just like the podcast guy, man. Ever since you went on that first one, everybody wants to talk to you. Hear your stories.
I can, you need the address for the check. Well, I enjoy, as people who endure a ride clear to the islands with me know, I like talking and telling stories. You haven't had to endure Vietnam War stories or other military stories.
Well, that does it for this episode of the podcast. I hope everyone had a good time. I sure did. Thank you, Bill, for sharing your wisdom. I can't wait to be on a boat with you and listening to some of your war stories and talking more about airplanes. As you guys can tell, I still deep down wish I was a Navy pilot. So if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast on any platform, Spotify, iTunes, what have you. And if you do use iTunes, if you would be so kind as to leave a rating and a review, I read them all. I want to make sure this podcast is getting better each episode for your listening pleasure. Stay safe out in the water. And until next time, I'll catch you later. Bye.